climate change is not going to be fought by a few people because it's a deeply ingrained problem. It will require the involvement of large scale communities. And for that, you'll have to speak to them in the languages they understand.
Hi, welcome back for another episode of The Voice of Gen Z, the voice of Generation Climate. Today we have with us a person who I'm a big fan of, who's built an institution also that I'm a big fan of, Dhimant Parekh, who's a co-founder of The Better India, a media house out of India, spreading positivity around the world in a time where the information economy is flooded, absolutely flooded with all sorts of information, and a large part of it very negative. The Better India is it sparks joy. It actually brings positivity into people's lives on a daily basis. And thank you for the institution you're building. What a pleasure to have you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Anirudh. Glad to be here.
So let's dive right into it. The Better India, positive news. Media as a lever. What is the power of media to influence change in society?
That actually goes back to the genesis of why we started the Better India, right? It really didn't start with the idea that, hey, look, there needs to be a media organization. But it started with the larger question about how could we leverage the internet to drive large scale social impact, right? That was really the larger question, right? And when we started thinking more about this, we realized that for the largest sort of scale of impact, you really need to bring communities together. Right? There's only so much that one individual can do. But if you can bring communities together, then you'll be able to mobilize and inspire these communities to go out and make a difference. And that's how impact would happen. So, you started with this question, how do you use the internet to drive change? And then we started thinking, okay, you need to bring people together. And then the question became, how do you bring people together, right? And that's when our hypothesis was that the power of storytelling can bring people together, right? So could we start talking about all the small progressive acts that were happening around us, in our neighborhoods, our communities, and see if that gets people excited, come together for causes, and then they get inspired enough that they go and make a difference themselves, right? So that's exactly how we started. And so the Better India that you see today, the genesis lies in that larger question: how do we bring people together? And storytelling is such a powerful medium because that's the only way in which you're able to inspire people to go and make a difference, as compared to preaching people or asking people to do something where it really doesn't work because it's not relatable, right? So when you break it down, when you take a story and break it down and make it relatable to people, it's incredible to see how much people want to get involved. So we've seen some tremendous impact happen across the country due to these stories, and I've been personally very amazed by it.
I think that's the human psychology, right? What we think is what we say. What we say is what we do. And all thinking actually starts with the stories we hear, right? Our lives are fundamentally crafted around the stories we tell ourselves too. What others tell us and what the world tells us, and then what we tell ourselves.
Exactly.
So all the stories is so fundamental to the human DNA, right? What do you think the biggest influence for storytelling can be in a person's life? In a normal day, is it the newspapers we read? Is it the TV we watch? Is it the journals we read? What do you feel like in a normal day in 2023 has become the most important touch point for stories to be soaked in?
I think there's so many sources of stories today. Earlier, like you said, right, it used to be stories we tell ourselves, or it could be stories that our family and friends would tell us, or our colleagues would tell us. And there would be that odd little external storytelling that would happen through television and films and books, right? But today, I think our own stories to ourselves are drowned out by the sheer amount of stories that you see on social media. Either you're scrolling Twitter, you're done with that, you're going to Instagram, you're scrolling Instagram, you're done with that, you're on Facebook. So it becomes extremely or that much more sort of difficult to reach out to people with things that matter, with things that you want people to kind of become aware of so that they can start making, a better life for themselves. So today, I think the challenge is not that, hey, we don't have enough stories. I think we have too many stories. And I think the challenge is who could curate that and make it relevant so that it's useful to the people that are consuming these stories, right? Now, who decides what's useful? It's so subjective. The beauty of the internet is that everything is decentralized. So there are no gatekeepers anymore, which is excellent, which is where it becomes all the more sort of important for the kind of storytelling we do, that we need to break it down and make it relatable to people. Like I am effectively talking about the development sector. I'm talking about climate change. I'm talking about ESG. But if I'm going to be talking about all of this in terms that only professionals from the development sector understand, I think we're doing a gross disservice to the sector, right? And so that's when the Better India kind of tries to relate these complex issues and map it out to stories of individuals. And when we put this out there, it's so easy to understand. This is the problem. This is how this person has solved it. And suddenly you're seeing people warming up to the idea that, look, this is not something that is jargon ridden, but it's something tangible that we can kind of work towards. And you're able to kind of solve. So I personally think this is a great era to be in if you're a storyteller. And I think all of us are storytellers. Because everything is decentralized. So you get to reach out to people at a very, very large scale, right? So it's just up to us in terms of how we use these platforms in a good way or a bad way.
Yeah, absolutely. I read this quote somewhere the other day, which is, Instagram and other platforms, they're tools. They can be used however you please. But unfortunately, a bunch of them have become platforms where you go and perform. You don't really go there to communicate, but you go there to perform, right?
Yeah.
So real communication is actually moving away to other mediums and other forums. And I'm particularly interested in seeing what forums those will be, like what mediums those will be now. Because we are moving away from, these tools were not created to perform, they were created to actually communicate, right? And then over time, they took the narrative of performance. So now what comes next? In your opinion, what comes next? To tell stories about the world and even about ourselves.
Yeah. Like exactly how like Naval puts it, right? He says like all social media is performative now, right? You go there to perform in front of your friends and family and not really to communicate. Look, I think what I believe in is this basic hypothesis that people will continue to aggregate online. That's been the nature of the internet, right? So it's just that the platforms are going to change and the way the aggregation happens online is going to change, or how they interact is going to change. But if you go back right to the early days, with the intranets and ICQs and all of that which was there, it was all about people coming together and chatting about topics they felt strongly about. Then the online forums came in, then the online boards came in, then the social networks started coming in, and if you just kind of step back and look at it, I think the fundamental premise remains that people want to aggregate online, right? So I think that's going to continue. We just have to figure out how are we going to reach out to those people, which are these platforms, and how do we make sure that these stories are continuously being served to them, no matter where they are. They were on Facebook earlier, now they went to Instagram, then they went to Snapchat, then they're on Twitter, there's something new coming up. It really doesn't matter, I think. But the internet is here to bring people together. Absolutely.
And everyone's becoming a creator now, right? So everybody who has stories to share. But the question of who are the curators without having gatekeepers, right? That's such an important part of it too. Curate, but don't gatekeep. And then I think on the other side of it is how people want to receive too, right? So within that, from all that having built the Better India, do you feel people actively gravitate towards negative news or positive news? And I know yours is called the Better India, and you're doing positivity. But how would you weigh that, right? What do people actively look for?
I think, the way the human mind is wired, it is wired to be alert when there is anything negative, right, or there's anything shocking. So what as a consequence happens is that headlines which are shocking, which are sensational, they grab attention because that's the instinctive nature of the human mind to react to it and be cautious. On the flip side, Anirudh, what I've seen also is that stories like ours, people want to share them far and wide. So we're starting to see that, and the way we've grown over the last 5-6 years, we've seen that people really want to be seen sharing positive stuff. Because it makes them feel better, and it also sort of improves their standing in their communities, because you're like, hey, you're talking about something interesting and something good, and this is great. As compared to really nobody wants to be the bearer of bad news, right? So yeah. So while I think sensationalism gets that first level of attention, I don't necessarily see it seeping into a point where people in their sort of immediate groups and stuff are continuously sharing negative stuff. You don't see that. We see a lot of the innovations we feature, the videos we put up. We see a lot of them floating around WhatsApp. In fact, I get them back on various different groups when people are sharing it and stuff. So I think inherently people want to share good stuff. People want to know about it. People are solutions oriented. That's been the story of mankind. We fundamentally believe in optimism and we try and solve things. It's just that the sensationalism gets you on a high alert. And, so I think we're going to be having a fair balance of both as we keep going forward.
And I know a lot of my questions are very psychological, particularly for you, because a lot of what media can be used for is, spread good news, spread positivity, but it's all about appealing to the human condition. Right? And how people really want to receive, how people want to share, like you're saying. There's an element of virtue signaling, feeling good about yourself. But at the same time, somewhere our brains, gravitate towards sensationalism and like that immediate, what happened right now? Like I want to stop on the street and see if somebody had an accident, right? Like that's such a big part of our Indian DNA, weirdly enough. Right? So within all of that, this massive information chaos that's going on all around us, how does positive news really stand out, and how does it reach the people who want to find it, right? And I think there the Better India has done such a great role in actually being that beacon of hope. So, what is the secret sauce that you have found to be that beacon?
I think the secret sauce is very, very simple, right? It's just telling a great story. Nothing comes close to being or sharing a authentic story of progress. People are always keen to know. People are always keen to participate. People are always keen to help out. And I think our secret sauce has been, if we were to kind of summarize it, I would say to consistently share authentic stories of progress for a decade is what leads to an overnight sort of growth, right? I think people really want to do good, but they don't know where to go. There are not enough trustworthy avenues, and especially in a country like ours, trust deficit is very high, right? So it's extremely hard for people to trust a brand, a community, and so on. So it just takes that much longer, right? So it's taken us a decade for the Better India to kind of for people to now come and say, if they have written about it, I'd love to go and volunteer there, or donate, or help out, and so on. But inherently, what we've seen people come out in droves to help out whenever we put out a call to action. So that's there. It's just that we've not been. I think conventionally nobody's been able to guide or give avenues for people to do good.
Absolutely. And there's again this notion that in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, average person in India is still living further down, right? In the hierarchy of needs. So basic needs aren't met. How can you expect them to do for others? But I think that's kind of wrong.
But that's wrong, right? Because I mean, almost every story featured on the Better India, majority of the people are people who are nowhere up the Maslow's hierarchy, but are are doing some incredible stuff to make lives better for themselves and people around them.
Which just shows you that altruism and wanting to do good is there in everybody, literally
Absolutely.
every single person, including climate action. And this is something we have learned over the last 2 years. It's not just a rich person's problem to solve with rich solutions. It's actually everybody's problem to solve, and everybody wants to play their part in being a solution. How have you managed to break that barrier of communicating climate change and climate action in a very easy to understand manner?
The approach we've taken, Anirudh, is that climate change is super critical. I mean, I don't think anybody can deny it anymore. We're seeing the effects everywhere, and that's going to just go happen. Now, there are two ways there were two ways in which we would go about talking about this, right? One way is to say, hey, doomsday is near, 1 degree centigrade rise every year, and we're going to face famine and drought and all of that stuff. And basically shock the hell out of people, right? Which is how largely it's been done. And what that does, I think, our view has been that the more you do that, the more you desensitize people from the problem, and more people just switch off because they no longer want to be a part of those conversations, and that is terrible for a democratic way of building things, right? That's terrible. If society switches off, there's nothing we can do, right? So instead, we kind of flipped it around and we said, look, here's an interesting way in which someone is fighting the lack of water in his district. Here's an interesting way in which someone has built a particular sort of farm which has brought down the temperature in that neighborhood by so many degrees. Here's how people are building urban forests in their backyards and bringing back lost species. And the more you kind of do it this way, people are like, wow, this is interesting. I didn't know this. And each of those stories add up to cumulatively have a massive impact on the environment, on communities, and so on, right? So, in fact, 6 months ago, we did an online event called Water Warriors, where we put out calls to people who were doing innovations in water conservation, right? And we got like thousands of applications and some incredible innovations. And when you start putting it there, we had a few organizations reach out saying, after you guys featured us, we've got opportunity from people to fund us, donate money, we've raised resources, and all of that started happening. So what have you done? You basically helped accelerate the fight against, say, water, right? By storytelling, by bringing people together. But you bring people together by giving them a solution. You don't bring people together by just bombarding them with problems, right? The moment you're going to stand on a mountain and preach down to people and say, hey, you're evil because you use a plastic spoon, that's not going to work. People are just going to switch off. But the moment you say, hey, here's an interesting innovator who has made spoons out of rice and is using it this way, you will suddenly see how, wow, this is amazing. Why are we using plastic spoons, right? So I think that's been our way of going about creating awareness about the problem, the innovation, and the impact that's potentially possible. And then you can start seeing some people taking more interest. You can start seeing policymakers reading some of these stories. So that kind of starts becoming, where you start influencing decision makers and so on. It is a long journey, but we're very confident that the moment you get people involved, the scale is of a different level, and it's just really, you can catalyze change so quickly. So we are hopeful we're going to get there.
I'm a firm believer in the power of storytelling to influence change. One person who is motivated by a very powerful story can be the fire starter for an entire community, for an entire household, for an entire community, right? You never know. It takes that one story. And amazingly, you go back to your heroes and think about it. Each of them can identify that one or two stories that played a key part in their life to really motivate them and influence them to want to do what they did.
Yeah.
So the power of a story is so fundamentally just heavy in our lives. What are one or two in your life that made you want to do what you do now?
Many things actually. So, but I still remember the early days when we were publishing stories from Bangalore. putting out, and then slowly we had people from across the country writing in saying, I work in this sector. Can I share things that I'm seeing here, and so on. And I think it was around that time, way back in 2015, 2016, maybe 7, 8 years ago. Or actually, even a little before that, the moment when we decided to do that, the Better India needs to scale was this one story where we had written about a photography club run by completely visually impaired people, right? So it's a photography club run by visually impaired people. So they listen to things around and they take fantastic photographs. And we thought, wow, that's an amazing thing. And we wrote about this. And a couple of weeks later, we actually had a visually impaired girl reach out to us, saying that all her life she dreamt of doing photography. But whenever she would bring it up to her family or friends, and they would say, look, what a ridiculous thought. You can't see. Why would you even think about this, right? And so I had kept it aside. And then someone told me about this article. And then I went and joined this photography club. And because of your story, it has completely changed my life. It has given me a whole new meaning. And this was way back when we were read by like a few hundred people, right? So to me, that was a big revelation that this story had transformed one person's life so strongly. And then since then, we never looked back, right? So today, our stories have brought water and sanitation in villages. We've helped slum schools get funded. We've helped farmers come out of poverty. We've helped farmer widows set up sustainable businesses. We've helped women in rural areas become entrepreneurs, set up their own businesses. It's been fantastic to see the scale of impact that has happened. But that was the first sort of revelation to me that storytelling could have such a deeply profound change in someone's life.
And the educational influences that you had in your life, you've got a very great pedigree, educational qualifications wise. What influence did that have in you wanting to go and set up a media house that would actually spread positive news?
Yeah, I must admit, of course, I had a relatively much more privileged sort of educational background. Growing up in Bangalore, where the academic institution I went to was very, very driven towards things like engineering and stuff. And back in those days in Bangalore, you could either be an engineer or a doctor. So I became a computer science engineer. I loved the subject. Did that, but all along I was also exposed to a whole bunch of folks who worked in NGOs, who volunteered there, who were in the arts, doing theatre, who were people who would come down from different parts of India to Bangalore. So so it really had a big influence on how I looked at things. So it no longer was just about looking at the world with an engineering lens. But the fact that it's a lot more complex, and there are a lot of privileges that you got, and there are a lot of privileges that people didn't get, and largely I think it's been an ovarian lottery, as Warren Buffett puts it, right? And so then the question becomes, what are you going to do with this ovarian lottery, right? You can either kind of leverage all of this and help out, or you can just continue on your path of same sort of consumption and everything else. And I think it was a very, very clear answer that I wanted to kind of make use of everything that I've done, I've learned, to be able to make a difference and build things that are of value. And so when I met my co-founder Anuradha at ISB, and as we were kind of having conversation, turned out we had very similar objectives in life, and the Better India was a very natural outcome, saying, look, we need to do something which can change lives, which can change people's mindsets. And I think there was no question about this the moment we kind of started working on this.
They often say the best ideas always seem like just a no-brainer in hindsight, right? You look at it and you're like, how did this not exist earlier? Why not?
Right.
Technically, all media should just be like good, positive media too, right? With a little bit of, this happened, this really big tragedy happened somewhere.
Yeah.
That's secondary.
No, I think
that's media too. But most media should be positively skewed media. So
I'm not no, I'm not so sure about that. I still believe that the entire spectrum of media needs to exist. For instance, traditional media, as quote unquote what we've known as traditional media, has done a tremendous job about pointing out what's broken. Because look, you need to know what's broken in order to go fix it, right? The problem, Anirudh, was that it was heavily skewed over towards talking about problems, and we felt that there needs to be a sort of the spectrum needs to be expanded so that a common citizen should be able to read about what's wrong, what's going wrong, but should also be able to know what's working and what can I be a part of to make things move forward. Because traditional media has had a top-down approach. Hey, this is broken, so you write about it, then you hope that that leads to an sort of institutional change, and the change trickles down, and that's one great way of bringing change. And the other approach that we decided to do is a bottom-up approach, where we said, look, we're going to make people aware about problems and then give them solutions, or show them people who are solving it, and then inspire them enough so that they start making a difference, and have that change go up, right? And we just felt that this second part of the bottom-up approach of change didn't exist, and we wanted to really kind of come in and say, look, let's balance it out. Because I think we need everything across the spectrum.
Absolutely, you're right. No, and I stand corrected. We can't just have the good. We got to have like across the spectrum for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
When it's problems arise when it's skewed too heavily on one side.
Exactly. I think we need absolutely.
And then there's actually an analogy that's come into my mind as we talk, which is your approaches don't give a man a fish. Don't even teach him how to fish. Show him somebody else who's learned how to fish, and then he'll be inspired to want to learn how to fish, right? Which is actually
really a nice way to put it. Yeah,
it's really powerful.
Yeah.
So you have very many themes you cover in your storytelling and narratives as well, and there are so many issues that we face as a species, as a planet. Climate is one. How do you manage to zone in on a few and just focus on storytelling around them better? Like, is it a annual theme kind of a picking that happens, or a personal preference picking that happens, or how do you zone in on a few that are most relevant for that particular time?
Yeah, I think it has been largely shaped by what we see happening around us. So for instance, I'll tell you, right, early 2014, when we really started to scale this thing up, we saw a lot of work happening in the areas of education on ground. And then we started seeing, as we move forward, in addition to that, we started seeing a lot of work happening in the farming sector, in the agri sector, a lot of innovations happening in agri-tech. So there was a phase where we really kind of brought out a lot of agri-tech innovations. And then I think about 2018, we saw sustainability becoming a very, very important point of conversation for a lot of our audience members, and we also saw a lot of people working towards it. So much so that we also launched a sustainability-focused product called the Better Home, and we've also seen a lot of. Now we're starting to see a lot of work around water conservation, climate change, and I think, in essence, what has happened is the Better India has been reflecting the concerns of people, and we've managed to kind of go deeper with solutions across the years, and I can see that change. So, where the concerns was around education, women empowerment, farming, now climate, sustainability before that. So I think it's largely been because we constantly are talking to our community members, and that influences us. And then, when we look around also, we see what's happening and, where are people working on. And I think this kind of then gets shaped up.
Yeah, it's an interesting pulse in a way, of the state of the times, of the state of the concerns people have, state of even where creative energy is going. Like now, there's so much interest in climate problem, thinking about it, but also solving it. Climate tech is super hot right now, right? So many people want to make their first career a climate tech career, or go into working in climate tech companies and, just solve the problem. And there's a notion that we only have till the end of the decade. if we want to have a cleaner, safer, fairer, better future. So within that, like while we're all playing our part and you're bringing carbon solutions and water solutions and waste solutions, the power of storytelling is going to be such an important lever to tell the stories that need to be told, influence the policies that need to be influenced, scale and bring in the capital that needs to be brought in. What is the Better India's part in that? Let's say from now to 2030, what do you think, particularly for climate, would be a really important role to play as a lever? And when do you think when do you feel like you'll be able to rest back and say, okay, I'm satisfied?
So the second question, right? When will you be able to rest back and say satisfied? I don't think that'll ever happen because the problems keep changing, the flavors keep changing, and I think the challenges keep changing. But to answer your question, whether it's a Better India kind of look at playing a role here, and I think it's a role that it's been playing all along, right? If I look at anything, especially climate, right, there are largely three sort of stakeholders, right? One is the citizens, right, and then you have the policymakers, right, and then you have the people who are, or the people/organizations who have solutions, right? The Better India continues to aim to be that single binding factor, to be able to bring the solutions, the organizations and the people who have the solutions, who bring the policymakers and get the citizens to know about all of this stuff, right? So I think our role will continue to be playing that amplification factor. So like, for instance, Climes is doing something incredible at one end. You have another organization working in, say, solar, figuring out how to get solar energy, all of that, right? We want to be that single amplifying platform that we bring all of them together. Anybody who wants to read about climate should be able to kind of go through all these ideas. Policymakers should be able to go through all of this and make sense of it and reach out to people like you and so on, say, look, what are your learnings? I think if we have solved for that, connecting these three in a way in which there are sort of tangible outcomes in terms of policy, in terms of execution of these things, in terms of scale, I think we'd consider ourselves quite happy to play a part in this. But long story short, I think what we want to do is continue to be the catalyst and the amplification platform for everything that's going to happen in this space.
Wow, that's incredible. That's a really, really powerful. Better India has a larger mission and vision than that. But specific to the climate one, that's incredibly powerful in itself too. And it almost sounds like you want to be a cross-pollinator, like, the catalytic glue between all the different stakeholders. That's lovely. And we have learned that there are all these folks out there, right? Intent is there in all the stakeholders we talked about. Individuals, policymakers, brands, enterprises. Intent is there. It's about action. And I think that action will happen if the right stories reach them, right? So that's why that's what TBI plays such an important role too. While you're doing that, what do you want? Where do you think we are lacking as a society, and what gaps need to be filled? And what is your call to action to whoever hears this episode?
There are many, man. There are many gaps. And one of the things is that there isn't enough awareness around climate change, largely being talked about in circles like ours, in languages like English. There's a whole sort of population out there which primarily speaks in its own regional language. And those languages, there are no conversations happening around climate change. And that is the 900 million plus, like the 1.2 billion plus set of population, which isn't even talking about climate change, right? Today, if you look at the primarily English speaking audience, at a stretch, even if I stretch it, it's, let's say, 90 million, 100 million. Like, I think that's overstretching, but still, you still have 1.2, 1.3 billion people not even aware of this, right? Not because they don't care, because nobody is talking about it in those languages and those things. So I think that's a huge gap, because the first and foremost step to solve anything is to get people to be aware of it. We haven't done a good job of it, right? I think so. Firstly, that problem needs to be taken. The problem statement needs to be taken everywhere, and get a lot more people involved in ways that they understand, right? And I think once we've done that is when we will start seeing some sort of a critical threshold, sort of moving the needle kind of an effort kicking in. Until then, it's going to be, to me, that's one of the largest gaps, creating the awareness. Because once you have that, then then is when you can come in with advocacy, because that is when you have a buy-in from a lot of people, right? So I think that's the first big gap, I would say. So anybody who wants to contribute, guys, start talking about it, start sharing facts, start talking about it in your neighborhoods, in your communities, in your families. Bring awareness to climate change and the solutions. And I think that, I would say, would be the immediate next step.
And in languages outside of English.
Absolutely.
Because you're right. Like, it gets limited to what, 8% of the entire Indian population, max. And we have a lot of great products, right, for climate. Lots and lots of great solutions. But if they're communicated in the English language and they're made available in the English language, that last mile distribution will never ever go through. So you're right. Even if intent is there, awareness is not to adopt it, right? And I think just the language component, I don't know how many companies in this space or overall in the tech space think about, right? That's such a fundamental first principle problem that we haven't really solved.
Absolutely. And that's because we're not thinking that this is a community-led sort of solution that's going to eventually emerge. Climate change is not going to be fought by a select few people. It's not because it's a deeply ingrained problem, right? It will require the involvement of large-scale communities, and for that you'll have to speak to them in the languages they understand. And I think that's the big one.
I fully agree with this, and I would love for us to figure out how we can play our part in this. Because at Climes, we are trying in our way to be the last mile distribution engine, at least to bridge intent and action. Just for the act of declaring, like with a checkbox, that, okay, I want to add a climate contribution when I'm booking a flight, or like booking a bus ride, or buying a shampoo. So just right there, how can we communicate it in other languages too? Right? I think that would be such a powerful lever, which we frankly have not thought about today. Right? We thought about it for the future, but not today. It's a very, very powerful nugget you're leaving me with.
No, that's awesome that you're thinking about it, right? We've been trying to do this by, now the Better India is also in Hindi, then we've got it in Bengali, now in Marathi and in Gujarati. So we've started 4 other languages. We're going to go expand to many more languages. The idea is these solutions that you see in the English edition, we need to get more people aware. Like the article we wrote on Climes, why is it not in Hindi? Why is it not in Marathi, right? For instance, why are people not knowing it? So collectively we have a lot of work to do.
Well, we're here to do it. I think we have a long way to go. We've just scratched the surface. On our end, at least, we've just scratched the surface. You're further along in your journey. And TBI is spreading positivity, spreading, much needed hope. I think hope is one of the most valued resources in society, right? There's never enough. You can always have more.
It's the hope, and even the need to be inspired is such a universal need, because it really gets you to start thinking and start acting, right? So,
absolutely. Thank you for all you do, and for the great institution TBI is, the Better India. And thank you for making the time today with us at Climes.
Thank you so much, Anurag. Really glad to be here. Thanks.
Appreciate your time. Yeah.